Ever wondered how we store and manipulate data in Python? Welcome to the fascinating world of variables, the foundational building blocks in programming. Let's start with a simple question. What is a variable in programming? Picture a variable as a container, a box if you will, that holds and stores data values. It's like a labeled jar where you can put in cookies, and whenever you need a cookie, you just read the label and take one out. In programming, the cookies are your data and the jar is your variable. Now, Python is a very user-friendly language. It doesn't require you to declare a variable formally. What does that mean? Well, in some languages, you have to tell the computer explicitly, hey, I'm going to use a variable and this is its name. Python, however, is a bit more intuitive. In Python, a variable is born the moment you assign a value to it. It's as if Python keeps an eye out on your code, and as soon as it sees you assigning a value, it says, aha, that's a variable right there. It's like naming a pet. The moment you give it a name, it's yours. For instance, if you type x equals 5 in your Python script, you've just created a variable named x. Python automatically understands that x is a variable and it should store the value 5 in it. There's no need for any formal declarations or ceremonies. In Python, the equal sign is the assignment operator. It doesn't mean equals in the traditional mathematical sense, but rather is assigned the value of. So when we say x equals 5, we mean x is assigned the value of 5. So remember, in Python, variables are created when you assign a value to it, not before. This unique feature makes Python an incredibly intuitive and straightforward language to learn, especially for beginners. It's one of the many reasons Python continues to be a popular choice for programmers around the globe. So that's a brief introduction to variables in Python. Up next, we'll dive into assigning values to these variables. Stay tuned. Now, how about assigning values to these variables? It's simpler than you think. One of the beauties of Python is its dynamic typing. Don't worry if that sounds complicated. It simply means that you don't need to declare a variable with any particular type, and you can even change the type after the variable has been set. It's all about flexibility here. Let's take an example. Suppose we have a variable named fruit. We could assign it a value by simply writing fruit equals sign apple. Here, the variable fruit is now of type string. How do we know that? Python has a handy function called type that reveals the data type of a variable. So if we write type fruit, Python would tell us it's a string. Now what if I tell you that fruit doesn't always have to be a string? Let's give fruit a new value. Fruit equals sign 5. Now if we use the type function again, Python would tell us that fruit is an integer. We've just changed the type of the same variable, fruit, from a string to an integer. But wait a minute, can we assign any type of value to our variable? Yes, indeed. Let's try with a float. If we assign fruit equals sign 2.5 and check the type, Python now informs us that fruit is a float. We've just seen how flexible Python is. We used the same variable fruit and assigned it a string, an integer, and a float at different times. Each time, Python understood what type of variable it was dealing with. But remember, while Python's flexibility can be a great asset, it's also your responsibility to keep track of what type of value a variable holds at any given time. Misunderstandings can lead to bugs, and we all know how pesky those can be. So, get creative, play around with assigning different types of values to your variables, and watch how Python adapts. Experimentation is key to learning, and Python provides a fantastic playground for just that. That's it! Assign a value, and Python understands what type of variable it is. Let's dive into the different types of data that Python recognizes. Now that we've got a basic understanding of variables, it's time to explore the different types of data that Python can store and manipulate. In Python, we primarily deal with three basic data types: integers, strings, and floats. First up, integers. Integers, often referred to as int, are whole numbers without a decimal point. They can be positive or negative and of any length. For instance, 5, -10, or 200 are all examples of integers. In Python, we would define these as follows. Here, and are variables storing integer values. Next, we have strings. Strings are sequences of characters enclosed within either single quotes or double quotes. They can include letters, numbers, spaces, and punctuation. For example, hello world, Python 123, or this is a string, are all strings. In Python, you could define these like so. Here, and are variables storing string values. Lastly, we have floats. Floats or floating point numbers are numbers with a decimal point. They can be positive or negative. For example, 3.14 minus 0.99 or 20.0 are all examples of floats. In Python, we would define these as follows. Here, and are variables storing float values. Now, it's important to remember that the type of data a variable holds can be changed. This is known as type conversion. For example, you can change an integer to a float or a string to an integer and vice versa. But we'll delve deeper into that in another session. And those are the basic data types in Python: integers, strings, and floats. Now that we understand variables and data types, let's see them in action with some basic arithmetic operations. In the world of programming, arithmetic is more than just addition and subtraction. It's a fundamental part of how we manipulate data. In Python, the arithmetic operations are straightforward and intuitive. Let's start with addition. If we have two integers, say 3 and 5, Python adds them just like we would on paper. We would write this as 3 plus 5, and Python would return 8. Now, if we try to add a float, say 2.5 to an integer like 3, Python is smart enough to give us a float as a result. This is because the sum of an integer and a float is a float. Subtraction works in a similar way. If we subtract 5 from 10, we get 5. But what if we subtract a larger number from a smaller one? Python handles this too, returning a negative number. For instance, if we subtract 10 from 5, Python gives us -5. Multiplication is as simple as using the asterisk symbol. If we multiply two integers, say 2 and 3, we get 6. If we multiply a float and an integer, Python gives us a float. For example, 2.5 times 2 gives us 5. This brings us to division, which is a little bit different. In Python, division always results in a float, even when dividing two integers. So if we divide 10 by 2, Python gives us 5.0, not just 5. This is because Python uses true division by default. However, if we want to get an integer result, we can use floor division, which is done by using 2 slashes instead of 1. In all these operations, Python takes into account the data types of the variables and gives us a result that makes sense. And that's the beauty of Python. It's smart, intuitive, and incredibly versatile. As you see, Python handles operations on different data types quite smoothly. Let's take a moment to summarize what we've learned. We began our journey by exploring the concept of variables in Python. We learned that variables are like containers. They store data which can be of different types, and each variable is given a unique name to differentiate it from others. We then moved on to understand how to assign values to these variables. In Python, this is a straightforward process. You simply use the equal sign, also known as the assignment operator, to give a value to a variable. For instance, if you want to assign the value 20 to a variable named age, you would write age = 20. Next, we delved into the world of data types. Python has several built-in data types, but we focused on 3 key ones: integers, strings, and floats. Integers are whole numbers, strings are sequences of characters enclosed in quotes, and floats are numbers with a decimal point. Python automatically determines the data type of a variable based on the value assigned to it. However, you can change the data type of a variable using type conversion functions if needed. Finally, we explored basic arithmetic operations. Python supports a wide range of arithmetic operations including addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. These operations can be performed on variables, and the results can be stored in other variables. This makes Python a powerful tool for mathematical calculations. We've covered a lot of ground in this video, but remember that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Python is a vast and powerful language, and there's so much more to learn. But don't worry, you're off to a great start. And that's a wrap on variables and data types in Python. Remember, practice makes perfect, so don't hesitate to try out these concepts on your own. Until next time, happy coding!